Today we're going to talk about the Compromise of 1850. It all comes down to California. California will be the state that will really be in the center of the slave debate. It's a large state. It's going to have a large population with the gold rush coming out there. It has territory that's both north and south of the Missouri Compromise line. And at this point, there are 15 free states, 15 slave states. And the question is, California, which side is it going to tip the balance for? The bottom line, though, is this. Most people in California didn't want slavery, and there really was never any question whether California would seriously be a free state or a slave state. It's going to be a free state, but the Southerners are going to try to fight every way they can to try to make it a slave state or get some type of concessions because they know it's going to upset the balance of power in Congress. With this going on, we're on the edge of civil war. The country leans on its elder statesman, Henry Clay, to make one more compromise. He successfully made the compromise that ended the nullification crisis, and this time the 73-year-old Clay will be asked to save the country and avoid civil war once again. What he comes up with is the Compromise of 1850. Basically, he said California will be a free state. He divides the rest of the West into two territories, Utah and New Mexico, and said, let's have popular sovereignty or voting for the issue of slavery there. He said the Missouri Compromise line will continue in the Great Plains. And then eventually, under the protest of the Southerners, they added a Fugitive Slave Law, which allowed for Southern slave hunters to go in the North and hunt for people they suspected of being runaway slaves. So this is what the Compromise of 1850 basically comes down to. California is a free state, popular sovereignty in the rest of the Mexican cession lands. Texas kind of got worked in this. We'll have to give away some of its northern land to New Mexico, and the U.S. will help pay off some of its debts from previous things that have happened. And there will be no slave trade in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. There will still be slavery there, but it will not be a slave trade hub anymore. And the South will get its more effective fugitive slave laws, which will try to slow down the Underground Railroad. It is hotly debated in Congress. John C. Calhoun was very much against it. He said there should be no compromise. And he said, again, talks about secession. He, again, is very old. He has tuberculosis and is on the end of his days as well. So a lot of these guys that are debating this are really at the very end of their careers, the end of their lives. They're trying to make this most important decision. In the end, through the pushing of Stephen Douglas and Henry Clay, the Compromise of 1850 was pushed through and accepted. And, it does exactly what I said earlier. It's going to add California, Utah, and New Mexico as popular sovereignty areas. And then they have this Fugitive Slave Law. The Fugitive Slave Act was really devastating for Northern African Americans, both free and runaway slaves. It said that anyone that helped the runaway slave could be thrown in prison. It also said that people could come and arrest slaves in free areas and bring them back into slavery. And the deal was this: if a suspected runaway slave was arrested in a free area, it would go before a judge, and the judge would get paid $10 to return the person to slavery and $5 to release them back. So that there was a big incentive to send all these people back to the South for slavery. And also, African Americans could not testify for themselves in court, so they had no representation, no way to tell their story. As a result, the consequence of this was that slave hunters went to the North and scooped up all kinds of African Americans, whether they were runaway slaves or not, accused them of being runaway slaves, and then sold them back into slavery. Sold down the river, so to speak. It was a real tragedy. Immediately, this all started happening, and about 20,000 African Americans fled to Canada because that was the only place they could find safety. What can we learn from all this? The Compromise of 1850 is not a good thing. It band-aids the country, saves it for about 10 more years from civil war. However, the compromise over the issue of the slavery is wrong. In our lives, it's easy to compromise our morals, and we all have probably done that from time to time. But, for the most part, we need to stay strong and try to do what we think is right, no matter how much pressure we're under. And that's a real challenge in life, a challenge that I've certainly myself have had to deal with, and probably many of you have as well. But, we want to stick to our morals and values, and we can't compromise those things when it comes up.